A German shepherd cowering in the corner of a shelter kennel after being struck by an impatient caretaker. What happened next not only changed the dog's life forever, but exposed a disturbing pattern that would ultimately transform an entire community's approach to animal welfare. This powerful story of resilience in the face of mistreatment reveals how a single moment of cruelty was captured by security cameras and sparked a chain reaction that nobody saw coming. Get ready for a journey that shows how sometimes the most profound changes begin with the courage of those who cannot speak but refuse to be silenced. The Oakage County Animal Shelter was chronically understaffed and overwhelmed. Budget cuts had reduced the workforce to a skeleton crew responsible for too many animals in facilities that were long overdue for renovation. The stress showed on everyone's faces, human and animal alike. In the last kennel of the dog wing, a German shepherd named Maverick had been cowering since his arrival 3 days earlier. Found wandering near the interstate, no microchip or collar, he exhibited the classic signs of abuse, flinching at quick movements, ducking when humans raised their hands, trembling when voices grew loud. Jenny Winters, the shelter's volunteer coordinator, had made special note of Maverick's case. He needs gentle handling, she'd written on his intake form. No sudden movements. Speak softly. Give him space. But this Tuesday morning, Jenny was out sick, and the shelter was short-staffed as usual. Marcus Davis, a recently hired caretaker with minimal training and growing frustration at the demanding workload, was tasked with cleaning Maverick's kennel. "Come on, move," Marcus snapped, trying to shift the German shepherd to one side of the enclosure. Maverick froze, eyes wide, body tense. When Marcus reached for his collar, the dog cowered further into the corner. What happened next was captured by the shelter's security camera. Marcus, his patience exhausted by a morning of difficulties, raised his hand and struck Maverick on the muzzle. "I said move." The German shepherd yelped and pressed himself harder against the wall, trembling violently, eyes showing pure terror. Marcus finished cleaning quickly and moved on, unaware that his actions had been recorded. But as he left, he failed to properly secure Maverick's kennel door, a mistake that would set in motion events no one could have anticipated. 30 minutes later, Elena Rodriguez arrived for her volunteer shift. The 20-year-old veterinary student had specifically requested to work with Maverick after reading his intake notes. She had brought high value treats and planned to simply sit near his kennel, helping him associate humans with positive experiences. As Elena approached the dog wing, she was met with an unusual sight. Maverick was not in his kennel. Heart racing, she quickly scanned the other enclosures, then rushed to check if someone had moved him. Finding no sign of the German shepherd, she alerted the front desk, triggering a facility-wide search. Security footage would later show what had happened. After Marcus left, Maverick had remained frozen for nearly 15 minutes. Then slowly the traumatized dog had nudged the unsecured door with his nose. When it swung open, he'd slipped out, navigating the hallways with his head low, avoiding human contact until finding an unlocked supply closet where he'd hidden himself behind a stack of blankets. That's where Elena eventually found him, curled into the smallest possible ball, shaking uncontrollably. What she did next would not only change Maverick's life, but would ultimately expose a pattern of neglect that had gone unchecked for far too long. Elena moved slowly, keeping her body low and non-threatening. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, remaining at a distance that respected Maverick's space. "You're okay now." She didn't attempt to grab him or force him from his hiding place. Instead, she sat on the floor, back against the wall, and waited. After 15 minutes of silence, she began softly reading aloud from her phone, a technique she'd learned for traumatized animals, allowing them to grow accustomed to a human's presence without direct interaction. An hour passed before Maverick showed any response. His trembling gradually subsided, and occasionally he would glance at Elena before quickly looking away. Progress was measured in these tiny moments. When shelter manager Tony Grayson found them, he was initially irritated that Elena hadn't immediately reported finding the dog. His expression changed, however, when he saw Maverick voluntarily shift slightly closer to Elena while she read. "How did he get out?" Tony asked quietly. "I don't know," Elena replied, "but something spooked him badly. He's more shut down than when I saw him yesterday." Tony sighed. "Let's check the security footage. Can you stay with him until we figure out a safe way to get him back to his kennel?" What the security cameras revealed left Tony speechless. The footage clearly showed Marcus striking Maverick, followed by the caretaker's carelessness with the kennel door. More disturbing was the discovery that this wasn't an isolated incident. Reviewing earlier footage revealed Marcus had been rough with several animals over the past month. Tony immediately suspended Marcus, pending investigation, and called Jenny, despite her being out sick. "We have a situation," he explained, "and I need your expertise with Maverick. He trusts Elena somewhat, but we need to move him from the supply closet." By evening, they had successfully coaxed Maverick into a quiet office converted into temporary housing. Elena had volunteered to stay late, continuing to read aloud while maintaining a respectful distance as the German Shepherd gradually adjusted to the new space. "What happens now?" Elena asked Jenny, who had arrived despite being unwell. "We document everything," Jenny replied grimly, "and we need to check all the animals Marcus has handled for signs of mistreatment." She hesitated before adding, "But there's something else you should know about Maverick." Jenny pulled up his intake photos on her tablet. "Notice anything?" Elena studied the images, then looked at Maverick across the room. "The markings around his eyes and muzzle are different." Jenny nodded. "Because this isn't Maverick based on these distinctive markings and a small scar on his right flank. I believe this is actually Duke, a police K9 who went missing during a training exercise 2 months ago." Elena's eyes widened. "Police dog. But why didn't they find him when they scanned for a microchip?" "That's what worries me," Jenny said, lowering her voice. According to his intake notes, the scanner didn't detect anything. Either his microchip migrated or someone deliberately missed it. Elena finished, the implication hanging heavily between them. Neither woman could have predicted how this discovery would connect to a larger web of corruption that had been festering within the county's animal control system, or how a traumatized German shepherd would become the key to unraveling it all. Officer Jason Reeves had spent 8 weeks searching for his missing partner. Duke had disappeared during a rural training exercise, vanishing into dense woods without a trace. The official report suggested the German shepherd had likely been killed by coyotes or had suffered an accident in the rough terrain, but Jason refused to accept this conclusion. He's too well trained to just wander off, Jason had insisted to his superiors, and we would have found remains if he'd been attacked. When Jason received Jenny's call, he broke every speed limit driving to the shelter. Surveillance footage showed the moment he entered the office, where Duke was being kept. The German shepherd's reaction was immediate and stunning. Despite his traumatized state, Duke's ears perked forward, his body tensed, and then, in a moment that brought tears to those watching, he raced across the room and pressed himself against Jason's legs, whining with recognition. "Where have you been, partner?" Jason whispered, kneeling to embrace his dog. Duke trembled against him, simultaneously displaying joy at the reunion and lingering fear from his recent experiences. The physical examination that followed raised disturbing questions. Duke's microchip had been surgically removed. A small, partially healed incision was discovered when they shaved the fur from his shoulder. He had lost nearly 15 pounds, and in addition to the new psychological trauma, he showed evidence of having been kept in confined quarters for extended periods. This wasn't a case of a lost dog being picked up by animal control, Jenny explained as they reviewed the findings. Someone took him, deliberately removed his chip, and kept him somewhere before he either escaped or was abandoned near the highway where he was found. The implications were serious enough to warrant opening an official investigation. Duke's status as a police canine meant his theft and mistreatment constituted a federal offense. Within hours, the local police department and the FBI had begun gathering evidence, including the security footage of Marcus striking Duke. When questioned, Marcus claimed no knowledge of Duke's origins, beyond finding him as a stray. However, his phone records told a different story, revealing communications with individuals suspected of involvement in dog fighting rings across the state. While Duke showed no evidence of having been forced to fight, investigators theorized he might have been intended for breeding or training other dogs due to his exceptional temperament and abilities. Throughout the initial investigation, Elena remained at the shelter, helping with the documentation and care of other animals potentially mistreated by Marcus. One evening as she prepared to leave, she found Tony reviewing additional security footage with a federal agent. "There's something odd here," Tony was saying, replaying a sequence from 2 nights before Duke was officially found as a stray. The grainy footage showed a shelter vehicle returning after hours with Marcus and another figure unloading what appeared to be a sedated German shepherd. He didn't find Duke as a stray, Elena realized. He brought him in himself and created a false intake story. The FBI agent nodded grimly. "And we need to figure out why. If they went to the trouble of removing his microchip and then bringing him to a shelter rather than simply abandoning him somewhere, they had a specific purpose." As the investigation expanded, so did the evidence of a larger conspiracy. Duke had not been the only missing dog with specialized training to disappear in recent months, nor was the Oakage County shelter the only facility where documentation had been falsified. A pattern was emerging of valuable working dogs being stolen, their identities obscured, and then being processed through shelters with the help of insiders like Marcus. The question remaining was why, a question Duke himself would ultimately help answer in a way no one expected. 2 weeks after his reunion with Jason, Duke began the process of rehabilitation. The psychological impact of his ordeal had left scars deeper than his physical injuries. He showed signs of anxiety in enclosed spaces and would panic if separated from Jason, suggesting he had experienced prolonged confinement and isolation. It's common with trauma cases, explained Dr. Mira Santos, the veterinary behaviorist working with Duke. But his strong foundation of training and the secure bond he has with Officer Reeves give him advantages many traumatized animals don't have. Jason had taken leave from active duty to focus on Duke's recovery, converting his garage into a comfortable space where the German Shepherd could decompress without feeling trapped. Elena visited regularly, having formed a connection with Duke during those crucial hours in the shelter. During one such visit, Elena noticed Duke's unusual reaction when she sat down her backpack, which contained textbooks from her veterinary classes. The German Shepherd became alert, focusing intently on the bag, his nostrils flaring. "What is it, boy?" Jason asked, recognizing his partner's alert posture, the same one Duke would assume when detecting narcotics during his police work. Elena carefully opened her backpack. "I have my pharmacology textbook and notes. We're studying different drug classifications this semester." Jason's expression changed. The narcotics unit had been investigating a new synthetic drug being distributed locally. Duke and I assisted on several searches before he disappeared. This observation led to a carefully orchestrated test. Under controlled conditions, Duke was presented with various scents, including samples from the pharmacology lab. His response was definitive. He alerted strongly to compounds similar to those used in manufacturing the synthetic drug. They took him because of what he knows. Jason realized someone discovered Duke could detect their product and saw him as a threat to their operation. The FBI incorporated this information into their expanding investigation, focused on connections between the dog theft ring and drug manufacturing operations. The breakthrough came when analyzing the soil samples taken from Duke's paws and fur at intake, which contained chemical traces consistent with drug production along with distinct mineral markers that helped narrow the search area. Meanwhile, conditions at the Oakage shelter were undergoing rapid change. The investigation had revealed multiple violations leading to the county commissioners approving emergency funding for staff training and facility improvements. Jenny promoted to interim director after Tony resigned amid questions about his oversight failures. Implemented new protocols for animal care and security. Elena found herself offered a paid position coordinating volunteer training. Her experience with Duke having demonstrated her exceptional ability to work with traumatized animals. The shelter was transforming into a model facility with community Support pouring in as the story of Duke's mistreatment and the subsequent investigation made local headlines. For months after Duke had been found, the FBI executed coordinated raids on multiple properties identified through the investigation. They discovered not only drug manufacturing operations, but also several missing dogs, including 2 other former police kinds, who, like Duke, had been stolen because of their ability to detect certain chemicals. The raid also uncovered evidence implicating a network of corrupt officials who had been protecting the operation, including, most shockingly, a high-ranking member of the county government who oversaw animal control funding. Through it all, Duke continued his recovery, gradually returning to his confident self. Jason documented this journey, sharing updates that inspired the community and brought attention to issues of animal welfare and the special needs of traumatized pets. What had begun with an act of cruelty captured on camera had expanded into a movement that would ultimately save countless animal lives, and the German Shepherd, who had cowed in fear after being struck by an impatient caretaker. He would soon return to service, though in a capacity no one had initially imagined. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Santos asked, watching Duke move confidently through the training course. "He's made remarkable progress, but returning to full police duty involves significant stress." Jason nodded, though his expression revealed mixed emotions. Duke's recovery has exceeded everyone's expectations. But you're right, I don't think traditional K-9 work is the right fit for him anymore. So, 6 months had passed since Duke's rescue from the shelter. The criminal case against Marcus and his associates had expanded to include charges ranging from animal cruelty to drug trafficking and corruption. Throughout the legal proceedings, Duke had remained a symbol of resilience. His story, inspiring changes in how law enforcement approached animal welfare cases. Now, as autumn painted the training facilities, surrounding trees in gold and crimson, Jason and Duke were pioneering something new. With support from the police department and grant funding secured through Elena's advocacy, they were developing a specialized program for Duke to serve as a rehabilitation partner for traumatized animals being processed as evidence in abuse cases. He understands them in a way humans can't, Jason explained, watching Duke gently approach a recently rescued terrier that had been cowering in its enclosure for days, refusing food or human contact. "He's been where they are." Elena, now completing her veterinary studies while working part-time at the reformed Oakage shelter, had documented remarkable results. Animals paired with Duke showed faster stress reduction, improved social behaviors, and greater responsiveness to rehabilitation techniques. His presence seemed to communicate a message that humans couldn't convey. "You are safe now. Understand. It gets better." Today's session was particularly significant. The terrier had been rescued from one of the properties raided as part of the investigation Duke had helped spark. Like many animals recovered from abuse situations, it exhibited extreme fear, responses that made medical treatment and basic care challenging. Duke approached with the careful body language he had developed for these interactions. Head slightly lowered, movements slow and deliberate, maintaining a respectful distance while communicating peaceful intentions. The terrier, which had growled and retreated, From all human approaches, watched Duke. With cautious interest, after several minutes of this delicate dance, Duke lay down a few feet from the terrier's enclosure, positioning himself so the smaller dog could observe him without feeling threatened. Jason and Elena remained further back, documenting the interaction but not interfering. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the terrier's posture shifted from defensive to curious. By session's end, it had moved slightly closer to the front of its enclosure, and for the first time since rescue, accepted food in the presence of observers. That's the fourth success this week, Elena noted, updating her records. The prosecution team is calling Duke's evidence transformative in building their animal welfare cases. The before and after documentation is helping judges understand the psychological impact of abuse in ways written reports never could. The program was expanding beyond initial expectations. What had begun as rehabilitation for Duke had evolved into a pioneering approach to animal welfare in legal contexts. Other departments were sending representatives to learn the techniques with plans to implement similar programs using recovered K9 who might not return to traditional police work. There's something else, Jason said as they walked Duke back to the transport vehicle. The department's community outreach division wants Duke to become the face of a new education program about animal welfare and reporting suspected abuse. They believe his story helps people connect emotionally with the issue. Elena smiled. From victim to advocate, it's perfect. What neither of them discussed, though both understood, was how Duke's journey had transformed their own lives as well. Jason had discovered a new purpose beyond traditional police work, becoming a sought-after expert in animal welfare as it intersected with law enforcement. Elena had found her veterinary career path focusing on forensic medicine and trauma recovery, with multiple job offers already extended for after her graduation. As they drove away from the training facility, Duke sat alertly in his specialized compartment, watching the world pass by through the window. Far cry from the terrified dog who had hidden behind blankets in a shelter supply closet. His journey from victim to healing presence for others embodied the program's core message. Trauma need not be the end of the story. The courtroom fell silent as Duke entered with Jason. Despite months of preparation, there had been concern about how the German Shepherd would respond to the formal environment and the presence of individuals associated with his trauma. But Duke walked confidently beside his handler, his rehabilitation complete in ways that once seemed impossible. This hearing represented the culmination of a sprawling investigation that had uncovered corruption extending from local animal control to state-level regulatory agencies. Marcus Davis, the caretaker, whose abuse had been captured on security footage, was merely one node in a network that had exploited shelter systems to conceal criminal activities, ranging from drug manufacturing to organized theft of specialized working dogs. Duke's presence today served multiple purposes. Beyond his symbolic importance to the case, he was demonstrating the pioneering court support dog protocol that Jason and Elena had developed with legal and behavioral experts. This approach was being considered for implementation in animal welfare cases nationwide, allowing recovered animals to be present during proceedings without causing undue stress to the animals or disruption to court functions. As Duke settled on his designated mat near the witness stand, the judge addressed the assembly. I want to acknowledge the unusual nature of today's proceedings. The presence of this particular service animal has been approved due to his unique connection to this case and the precedent it may establish for future animal welfare prosecutions. Elena, seated in the gallery, felt a swell of pride as Duke maintained his composed demeanor. Thought back to their first meeting in that shelter supply closet, the terrified dog hiding behind blankets, too traumatized to make eye contact. His transformation was more than a personal victory. It represented the potential for healing that existed in even the most damaged victims. The prosecution presented evidence, systematically, including the security footage that had started the investigation. When the video of Marcus striking Duke played on the courtroom monitors, the German shepherd's ears flicked toward the sound, but he remained calm, grounded by Jason's reassuring presence and the extensive desensitization training they had undertaken. Expert witnesses explained how the investigation had expanded from that single incident to uncover a operation that had used shelters as processing points for stolen animals, particularly those with specialized training that made them valuable or threatening to criminal enterprises. Veterinary forensic specialists detailed how Duke's medical examination had provided critical evidence from the surgically removed microchip to the chemical traces that had led investigators to drug manufacturing locations. When Jason took the stand, Duke maintained his position nearby, a living testament to both the trauma inflicted and the healing possible through proper intervention. Jason detailed Duke's original training, disappearance, and the remarkable reunion at the shelter. His testimony, punctuated by occasional glances at his partner. In your professional opinion, the prosecutor asked, what would have happened to Duke had the abuse not been captured on security footage? Jason considered the question carefully. Based on the pattern established by the investigation, Duke would likely have been processed through the shelter system under his false identity as Maverick, then transferred to another facility or adopted out through channels controlled by the network. His valuable training would have been exploited or, if deemed too risky due to his ability to detect their drug manufacturing, he might have been eliminated. The implications hung heavily in the courtroom. How many other animals had been processed through similar channels before the scheme was uncovered? How many working dogs had disappeared without the determination that had driven Duke's case forward? The hearing concluded for the day. Reporters gathered outside, eager to catch her images of the German shepherd, whose abuse had triggered the investigation. Instead of exploiting this interest, Jason and Elena had worked with the prosecutor's office to develop an educational approach using media attention to highlight broader issues of animal welfare and community reporting of suspected abuse. Duke's story resonates because people see his journey from victim to advocate, Elena explained to a journalist as they left the courthouse. But the larger message is about the systems that failed before he was rescued and how community vigilance is essential to preventing similar cases. What no one could have anticipated was how Duke's case would catalyze legislative change. lawmakers began drafting enhanced protections for working animals and stronger oversight of shelter operations. From a single act of cruelty captured on camera had grown a movement with implications beyond any individual animal's story. 2 years to the day after Duke's rescue from the Oakage County Shelter, a ribbon-cutting ceremony marked the opening of the Duke's Dignity Center for Animal Rehabilitation and Training. The facility built on repurposed county land, with a combination of government funding and private donations, represented the tangible outcome of the case that had transformed animal welfare practices across the state. Duke, now 9 years old and fully recovered from his ordeal, sat attentively beside Jason as officials made their remarks. His graying muzzle and the small patches of white fur around his eyes gave him a distinguished appearance, complementing the specialized therapy dog vest he wore in his role as the Sense Canine ambassador. Elena, who had completed her veterinary degree and now served as the Sense medical director, watched from nearby, remembering the frightened dog she had found hiding in a supply closet. The contrast between that traumatized animal and the confident, balanced German Shepherd before her never ceased to amaze her. The Duke's Dignity Center had multiple functions. It served as a rehabilitation facility for animals recovered from abuse situations, training center for law enforcement and animal control officers, and an educational resource for the community. Most innovatively, it housed the working dog recovery program that Duke had inspired, a specialized approach to rehabilitating service and working dogs who had experienced trauma or required retraining for new roles. After the ceremony, visitors toured the facility, learning about the programs that had grown from Duke's case. In the rehabilitation wing, rescued animals received specialized care designed to address both physical and psychological trauma. The training center provided certification courses for animal welfare professionals, emphasizing evidence-based approaches to investigating abuse and supporting recovery. At the heart of it all was the bond between handler and animal, exemplified by Jason and Duke. Their partnership had evolved from traditional police work to pioneering new territory in animal-assisted rehabilitation. Together they had worked with dozens of traumatized animals, helping them reconnect with humans and, when possible, return to service in modified roles suited to their experiences. As the day's formal activities concluded, Jason and Elena found a quiet moment away from the crowds, watching Duke demonstrate calming signals to a recently rescued border collie in one of the rehabilitation yards. "Remember when we thought success would be just getting him back on police duty?" Jason said, smiling as Duke gently encouraged the more timid dog to explore a training obstacle. Elena nodded. He found a different purpose, maybe the one he was always meant for. The investigation sparked by Duke's case had led to significant convictions, with Marcus Davis and several higher-level operators receiving substantial sentences. More importantly, it had exposed systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed the exploitation of shelters and working animals. The resulting reforms included enhanced security protocols, better training for shelter staff, and specialized tracking systems for working dogs. Duke would never know the full impact of his story. How a moment of cruelty captured on camera had unleashed a chain of events that transformed an entire system. but as he guided another traumatized animal toward recovery, his actions spoke to a truth that had emerged from his journey. Sometimes the deepest wounds create the greatest capacity for healing others. The German shepherd who had once cowed after a harsh blow now stood as a living embodiment of resilience, his very presence communicating to damaged animals and the humans who cared for them that trauma need not define a life, that fear could be overcome, and that purpose could be found even after profound betrayal. As the day ended and visitors departed, Duke returned to the home he shared with Jason, where he would rest before returning to his work tomorrow. The security cameras that had once captured his moment of victimization now served a different purpose, documenting success stories and training techniques that would help countless other animals. From a single act of cruelty had grown a legacy of compassion that would continue long after Duke's working days were done. Reminder that sometimes the most powerful advocates for change are those who have themselves experienced the very conditions they help transform. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that even the darkest moments can lead to unexpected light when we refuse to look away from suffering and instead channel our outrage into positive action. Every animal deserves dignity, and every act of compassion matters.